He was the #1 draft pick and considered the future greatest center in the NBA. Together with Hakeem Olajuwon, he was supposed to rule the league. He knocked the Lakers out of the playoffs with an incredible shot in the final seconds. It seemed a new era had begun. Little did anyone know then that this shot would become one of the last peaks of his career. While Olajuwon won 2 championships and became a legend, Ralph Sampson gradually faded from the big game. Why did it all collapse so fast? And how great could this pair have become if Sampson had stayed healthy? In 1983, the Houston Rockets received the first pick in the draft and selected Ralph Sampson. He was not just a tall center. Standing 7 feet 4 inches tall, he possessed unusual mobility for such a giant, could shoot from a distance, and was already considered a player around whom the team's future could be built. If, like me, you enjoy looking back at the great NBA legends of past decades, and you're interested in their true stories and little-known facts that are rarely talked about, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Your support truly helps the channel grow and makes it possible to bring you more videos like this. Thank you. Now, let's continue. A year later, Houston got the first pick again. This time, the choice fell on Hakeem Olajuwon. Thus, 2 consecutive #1 draft picks ended up on the same team, 2 huge centers, 2 young players, each of whom could become the face of the franchise. And it was here that an idea emerged that seemed almost unbelievable, even for the NBA of the 80s. Instead of choosing between 2 big men, Houston decided to put them side by side. Sampson was about 4 inches taller than Olajuwon, yet he did not look like an awkward giant. He could move across the court, attack facing the basket, and create problems for defenders far away from the traditional center zone. Olajuwon was completely different. Fast, sharp, incredibly technical. His movements near the basket resembled the play of a small forward rather than a 7-foot center. That is why their combination looked so dangerous. One could crush opponents with his height and size. The other forced big defenders to constantly react to speed and technique. Together, they earned a nickname that forever remained in NBA history: the Twin Towers. But the nickname alone meant nothing if the results did not match expectations, and the results started appearing very quickly. Sampson was already a league star. Olajuwon was rapidly turning into the same kind of force. And gradually, the Houston Rockets ceased to be perceived as a team with an interesting experiment. They were becoming a real threat. In the 1985-86 season, everything changed completely. Houston reached the Western Conference Finals, where they were awaited by the defending champions, the Los Angeles Lakers. For most, this looked like too serious a test. The Lakers had Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and James Worthy. They knew how to win big series. But Houston had 2 towers, and it very quickly became clear that this was no longer a nice experiment. This could be a new power in the NBA. And if Sampson and Olajuwon were truly going to rule the league, they had only one thing left to do: prove it against a team that considered itself the master of the West. The series against the Los Angeles Lakers became the moment when the entire NBA started talking about the Twin Towers. Prior to this, Sampson and Olajuwon were considered a very talented young pair. Now, they had to prove they were capable of stopping a team that had been the main master of the Western Conference for several years. The Lakers entered the series with vast experience. They knew how to play such matches, how to survive pressure, and how to use every opponent's mistake. Their roster included players who had already become champions and were used to big stages. But Houston turned out to be not at all the kind of team that could be intimidated by names. Sampson and Olajuwon constantly created problems under the basket. If the defense switched to one, the other got space. If opponents tried to close off drives, opportunities for passes and shots opened up. And the longer the series went on, the more obvious it became. The Lakers faced an opponent they did not expect to see this strong. Houston won the opening matches and forced the defending champions to play on the edge. Then the pressure only increased. By Game 5, the Rockets were already leading the series 3-1. For the Lakers, this was a must-win game. Another defeat, and the season would be over. The game turned into a real battle. No one wanted to yield a single possession. The score constantly changed, and the teams approached the final seconds practically tied. Then came the moment that forever changed the perception of Ralph Sampson. Houston had the last possession. The ball ended up in Sampson's hands. The huge center found himself in a situation where backcourt players usually decide the fate of a match. But Sampson got the opportunity to shoot. He released the ball in motion, practically losing his balance. The buzzer sounded. The ball hit the rim and dropped inside. Houston won with a score of 114-112. Sampson had just knocked the Lakers out of the playoffs with a buzzer-beating shot. For Los Angeles, the season was over. For Houston, this was a ticket to the NBA Finals. And for Sampson, a moment that should have been the beginning of something much greater. Because now, only one step remained for him and Olajuwon: the Finals. And there they were awaited by the Boston Celtics, a team that in those years was itself considered a symbol of championship basketball. Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish, and a roster that already knew the price of the season's main matches. Houston lost the final series 2-4, but no one on the team took this defeat as an end. Quite the opposite. Sampson was only 25 years old. Olajuwon was 23. They had just knocked out the reigning champions of the West and reached the finals. It seemed they had many similar attempts ahead. It seemed they were just beginning. And that is why no one could have guessed that the season, which was supposed to be the first chapter of their future dynasty, would soon turn out to be the last moment when the Twin Towers truly looked invincible. After the finals against the Boston Celtics, Ralph Sampson did not look like a loser. Yes, Houston did not take the championship title, but for the team it was a huge step forward. And for Sampson himself, it was confirmation that all the expectations surrounding him were not an exaggeration. At 25, he had already managed to become the #1 draft pick, Rookie of the Year, a 4-time All-Star, and one of the most discussed players in the league. Now, he also had an NBA Finals appearance. And right next to him was Olajuwon, who was only 23 years old. It was age that made Houston fans look to the future with such optimism. It seemed this team was just beginning its journey. They had already reached the finals, but both main players had not even approached their prime years yet. Everything was supposed to continue. However, Sampson's body was gradually telling him otherwise. Health problems did not appear out of nowhere. Huge height, body mass, constant loads, and years of professional basketball created colossal pressure on the organism. Now, every new injury became an increasingly serious problem. Sampson continued to take the court, but his former lightness was gradually disappearing. Not long ago, he could play a match constantly moving across the court and making opponents forget that they were facing a player over 7 feet 4 inches tall. Now, he increasingly had to fight not just the opponent, he was fighting his own body. And that began to reflect on his game. Matches were missed more and more often. Physical shape was no longer the same. Problems with knees, back, and legs appeared. Every return became an attempt to find the Sampson viewers saw a year earlier once again. But bringing back the past turned out to be impossible. The season after the finals was especially hard. Houston remained a strong team, and Olajuwon continued to develop. But without the former Sampson, the Rockets' structure gradually lost its main feature. The Twin Towers were supposed to create constant pressure on opponents. Now, one of the towers was spending more and more time off the court. And when Sampson returned, one could no longer be sure that he would play a full match without another problem. This was the main cruelty of the situation. He did not disappear overnight. He did not lose everything after a single failed episode. His career seemed to slowly slip through his fingers. At first, those around him hoped these were temporary difficulties. Then they waited for the return of his former shape. Then they began talking about the need to limit his workload. Meanwhile, Olajuwon continued to move forward. And here the history of the two players begins to diverge. One was gradually turning into the future leader of Houston. The other was trying to save a career that had seemed like the beginning of long domination just recently. The most painful thing was that Sampson had already proven how great he could be. He was not a player who got too much attention just because of his height. He could truly determine the outcome of big games. He had already done it against the Lakers. He had already played in the finals. He had already stood next to Olajuwon on the threshold of a possible new era. Now, the question sounded quite different. Would Ralph Sampson even be able to return to where he was just a year ago? And while Houston tried to save the team, the situation became more complicated. Sampson's problems coincided with other troubles within the roster, and gradually, memories were all that remained of the team that had just played in the NBA Finals. The scariest part was yet to come, because soon, the Houston management had to make a decision that seemed unthinkable just recently. If Sampson could no longer be the player around whom the team was built, his future in the Rockets came into question. For the Houston Rockets, this was a moment that seemed impossible just a few months prior. The team had just reached the NBA Finals, and its main young stars were supposed to become the foundation for years to come. But now, increasingly serious questions surrounded Ralph Sampson. He missed games more and more often. His physical condition did not allow him to play with the same intensity as before. And when he took the court, the former dominance was no longer there. Olajuwon continued to remain the central figure of the team, but Houston was gradually ceasing to be the collective that reached the finals just a year ago. Sampson's problems coincided with severe events around other players. Lewis Lloyd and Mitchell Wiggins received long-term suspensions after league rule violations related to drug use. The roster, which recently looked ready to fight for a championship, began to rapidly lose depth. And then came the moment when it became clear. Bringing back the old Houston would no longer work. Sampson signed a new contract with the club, but the continuation of the story turned out completely different from how it was imagined. In December 1987, the Rockets traded him to the Golden State Warriors. In just a few years, he went from the #1 draft pick and one of the most promising players in the NBA to a basketball player whom his own team decided to send to another club. And the most painful part was not even the trade itself. Sampson and Olajuwon were supposed to play together for many more years. They were supposed to become one of the scariest pairs in the league. They were already compared to a future dynasty. They had already proven they could beat the best. They had already reached the finals. But now, one of them was leaving. The Twin Towers collapsed almost as fast as they appeared. For Sampson, the move to Golden State was supposed to be a chance to start over. Perhaps a change of team would help restore his career. Perhaps a different environment and lesser load would allow him to become the player opponents feared once more. But this did not happen. His knee problems continued. In Golden State, he was no longer that incredibly mobile giant who once made defenders confused about how to play against him. His role diminished. Statistics dropped. And the years that should have been the best in his career slipped away one by one. Meanwhile, Olajuwon stayed in Houston. And this is where the story becomes especially bitter. Because Olajuwon did not disappear along with Sampson. He continued to develop. His game became more and more refined. He was turning into a leader around whom a championship team could be built again. And a few years later, what Houston fans dreamed of back in 1986 happened. Only now, one tower remained on the court. And this tower was going to prove that the old Houston could indeed have become a champion. Before Olajuwon could hoist the championship trophy overhead, Sampson had to watch as a career that once promised a place among the greatest centers in NBA history finally slipped away from him. After the trade to the Golden State Warriors, Ralph Sampson still had a chance to change the course of his history. He was only 27 years old. For an ordinary basketball player, this could be the absolute peak of his career. But for Sampson, age guaranteed nothing anymore. Knee problems continued. The organism that previously allowed him to combine huge height with unusual mobility could no longer withstand former loads. Each season became harder. In Golden State, he no longer looked like a person around whom a team could be built. His minutes were cut, statistics fell, and former confidence gradually disappeared. The most cruel comparison was obvious. Just recently, Sampson was one of the most dangerous players in the NBA. He could score from different zones, fight for rebounds, defend near the basket, and move across the court in a way no one expected from a player of his height. Now, all of that remained in the past. His knees did not allow him to return to his former style of play. Sampson still tried to continue his career. He moved from team to team, hoping to find a place where he could feel like a full-fledged player again. But the NBA no longer expected the former miracle from him. After Golden State, there were the Sacramento Kings and the Washington Bullets. He continued to take the court, but his best years were far behind him. It is here that it becomes especially clear how rapidly his destiny changed. In 1986, he played in the NBA Finals. In 1987, he was traded. And a few years later, the man once called the future greatest center was already fighting just to stay in the league. Over 9 seasons, Sampson played 456 regular season games. This is very few for a player from whom a career spanning 15 or even 20 years was expected. But parallel to this, something even more painful was happening. Hakeem Olajuwon continued to grow. He was becoming the leader of Houston. His technique improved, his influence on the game increased, and the team gradually turned into a championship contender once more. And in the early 90s, Olajuwon was no longer just Sampson's partner from the past. He became an independent superstar. In 1994, the Houston Rockets reached the NBA Finals. Now Olajuwon was the team's main player, and this time, he did not stop. Houston defeated the New York Knicks and became NBA champions for the first time in club history. And a year later, the team did it again. 2 championships in a row, 2 titles that could once have been part of the shared history of Sampson and Olajuwon. But Sampson was no longer by his side. And therein lies the bitterest irony of the entire story. They truly could have become a great duo. They had already proven they could reach the finals. They had already knocked out the Lakers, who were considered the main force of the West at that time. All they had to do was stay healthy and keep developing. Instead, history took a different turn. Olajuwon got the opportunity to build his own legacy. Sampson got something completely different. His career gradually turned into one big, unanswered question. What if his knees had held up? What if he had stayed healthy for at least another 5 or 6 years? And most importantly, what would have happened to the Houston Rockets if the 2 towers had continued playing together in their prime? It is impossible to know the answer to these questions for sure. There is no button in NBA history that allows rerunning the 1987 season and keeping Ralph Sampson healthy. Therefore, one can only speak about what was real and how immense the potential of this pair was. And reality was impressive. Sampson and Olajuwon had already led Houston to the NBA Finals together. They had already defeated the Lakers, who were considered one of the strongest teams of their generation. At the same time, Sampson was only 25 years old, and Olajuwon was 23, meaning their best basketball, by all normal standards, should have been ahead. Instead, the opposite happened. After the breakup of the Twin Towers, Sampson never approached the level he showed in the mid-'80s again. His physical problems continued to limit his capabilities, and each new season became harder. And the further time went on, the stronger the contrast became between how he was imagined at the start of his career and how it ended. When Sampson entered the NBA, people expected more than just a few bright seasons from him. He was considered the future face of the league. #1 draft pick, Rookie of the Year, All-Star in his very first season, 4-time All-Star, a player who reached the NBA Finals alongside Olajuwon. For such a player, 9 seasons and 456 matches look like an almost unbelievably short career. Yet there is another detail that makes his story especially tragic. Sampson did not disappear from the NBA because he suddenly turned out to be not good enough. He disappeared because his body no longer allowed him to be the Ralph Sampson the league knew. And that is a huge difference. A player can lose his spot on the roster because younger competitors bypass him. He can stop fitting into the coach's plans. He can simply lose form. Sampson had something else. He had already proven he was capable of playing at the highest level. His problem was that he could no longer regularly withstand the physical workload that once made him unique. Meanwhile, Olajuwon continued writing a completely different story. He became the leader of Houston. He won 2 championships. He received awards and recognition that people expected of him back when Sampson was still by his side. And every success of Olajuwon involuntarily reminded everyone of what could have happened to their duo. Perhaps this is the strongest question of the entire story. Not why Sampson did not become great. He had already managed to show he was capable of greatness. The question is different. Why was a man who stood so close to historical basketball legacy deprived of the opportunity to create it? In 1986, he scored that very shot against the Lakers. At that moment, it seemed the NBA had just witnessed the birth of a new power. A few years later, almost nothing remained of that team. Olajuwon continued his path to the summit. Sampson continued to fight for the ability to remain a professional player. 2 careers that began almost simultaneously and on the same team went in completely opposite directions. And that is why the story of Ralph Sampson is not just the story of an injured athlete. It is the story of a man who came within a few steps of changing an entire NBA era, yet never got the opportunity to find out how far he could have gone. In 1987, the Houston Rockets finally decided on something that seemed unimaginable just recently. Ralph Sampson was traded to the Golden State Warriors. He was only 27 years old, but the former Sampson had almost vanished. In the new team, he tried to start over, but knee problems continued to haunt him. His role shrank, and his statistics no longer resembled the times when he was considered the future greatest center of the league. The most painful thing happened to Houston. The team lost one of its 2 main towers. The project that was supposed to lead the Rockets to multi-year domination effectively ended just a few years after its birth, and Olajuwon stayed. Now he had to prove he was capable of winning a championship even without his former partner. Olajuwon did not just remain the leader of Houston, he turned into one of the greatest players of his era. In 1994, the Rockets reached the NBA Finals again. This time, the New York Knicks stood across from them. The series turned out to be grueling, but Olajuwon carried it through to the end and became a champion for the first time. A year later, an even more impressive event occurred. Houston won the title again, becoming champions for the 2nd year in a row. Olajuwon got what he and Sampson had dreamed of together. But now, the person with whom this project once began was no longer there. And this raises a question history will never give an exact answer to. What would have happened if Sampson had stayed healthy? We only have real facts. Houston had already reached the finals with this pair. They had already beaten the defending champion Lakers. Sampson was 25 years old. Olajuwon was 23. They were just beginning. Therefore, it is impossible to state how many titles they would have won together, but one can imagine the scale of possibilities. At the end of the 80s, the Lakers continued to dominate. Boston remained a powerful force, and Detroit prepared to conquer the East. A healthy Sampson and Olajuwon could have turned Houston into a top contender for years. But this is history that never happened. And that is why Ralph Sampson remains one of the biggest what-ifs in NBA history. His career ended much earlier than everyone around expected. He managed to become a star, a four-time All-Star, and an NBA finalist. But all of this looks like only a fraction of the path predicted for him. Together with Olajuwon, he was supposed to rule the league. Instead, one became a champion and a legend, while the other forever remained a symbol of unfulfilled greatness. In 1986, Sampson hit a shot that sent the Lakers home, which seemed like the dawn of a new era. Today, that moment is perceived differently, because we know what happened next. That team did not become a dynasty. The Twin Towers broke up. Olajuwon continued his path to greatness, and Sampson's career plummeted rapidly. Sometimes, sports history remembers not only those who won everything, it also remembers those who felt like everything already belonged to them. Ralph Sampson was precisely such a player. He came as close to the summit of the NBA as possible, and then ended up too far away from it.